one of the things that I know you have done a ton of is teaching. I'm a traditional teacher by trade. So just that word teach, teaching really speaks to me. You've done a lot of teaching both online, off. You're an author who has many books as an expert. One thing I'd love to start by talking about, though, is with all of this knowledge and expertise you have, if you were to pick just one thing you went in to do, let's say a guest lecture at a college class, what is something right now that John Meese would just absolutely love to teach if you could just pick that one thing to do for the guest lecture?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think for me, I would want to spend that time really diving into teaching people how to get clear on the real people they're solving, but really in the framework of like, who are the real people you're solving? I'm sorry, not solving. Who are the real people you're serving? What is the real problem they have, and what is your real solution to that? And I use like that's my approach to building a business. Is at the core of it is you're saying like I help real people solve real problem with real solution. I use the word real a lot there because so much of creator economy, internet marketing, entrepreneurship is based on, collecting followers or creating something to serve an avatar. And it's just, it's very quickly that brand new entrepreneurs will often lose complete connection to who the heck they're actually trying to serve as a human being on the other end of things. And that ends up being the cause of a lot of problems in a lot of businesses. And so, I mean, sometimes I'm talking to established businesses that have somehow made it to the point where they're making millions of dollars a year in revenue, and they don't even really know who they serve anymore. It's just all numbers, right? You can't really imagine a million email subscribers or 100,000 social media followers. If you imagine those as like real human beings, it kind of breaks your brain. And so when people lose that ability to connect to the real person they're trying to serve, they lose their superpower as an entrepreneur, which is empathy. And unless you're a sociopath, you are hardwired with empathy, your ability to put yourself into the shoes of someone else, and to see what they see, to feel what they feel, to think what they think. And that's a superpower as an entrepreneur. And a lot of people at scale lose that. But also, for some reason, a lot of people who don't have any scale lose that. They come out of the gate going like, I'm serving six-figure side hustle mamas. And you're like, who the heck is that? Like, that's not a real person. And they end up trying to like act like the big guys, but the big guys are actually struggling to kind of get back to being personal and connecting to the real people. So that's definitely what I would talk about and what I would teach.
Can you think of a few more funny examples like that? Because I think it really helps people wrap their minds around like what not to do's, so to speak.
Oh man, well, have you ever heard of Juicero, the startup company, by any chance?
I don't believe so.
So this was years ago. They raised a ton of money. I mean, they were saying like, look, the future is green. Everybody's going to be drinking green smoothies, green juice for breakfast every single day. It's what's going to happen. And so they raised hundreds of millions of dollars, built this huge startup to sell this $600 machine called the Juicero machine, and it's just this like massive machine that would like sit on the counter of your kitchen, like it's like permanent. You're not going to move it around. Bigger than a coffee maker. And so they created this machine. It's $600, revolutionary. And then they sold these protein packs to go with it. So you pay $10 or $15 and you get this like squeeze pouch that you basically like put into the Juicero machine. And then it would kind of like process it and give you this like beautiful, delicious green juice. Well, then Bloomberg's business department did a test where they bought the protein packs, but they didn't buy the $600 machine. And they found out that if you just squeeze it into a cup of water and shake it up, you get the same exact thing. And that's, I think, a classic example of a business trying to solve a problem that didn't exist. Like, no one was thinking, how do I take this squeeze pouch of this green goo and turn it into a delicious breakfast? But if they were not thinking, you know what I need is a $600 giant machine on my counter. And so the company failed dramatically, publicly, after raising hundreds of millions of dollars and having the brightest minds in Silicon Valley consulting them. There's actually, I did see one business recently that 3D prints Juicero keychains you can get, just as a reminder to not do that.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a really classic example of just a massive amount of waste of like, they just lost touch of like the humans and underneath, because that's all, I mean, my background's in traditional economics. That's how I got into entrepreneurship in the first place. And like, all it is just how humans do stuff, how we do stuff together. That's all economics and entrepreneurship is. And a lot of people just lose sight of the humans.
before we go too far down my next line of questioning, because as you say, like how you got into
Yeah.
entrepreneurship and how you solve problems, which I know is no doubt going to come up on this episode, to use, kind of Simon Sinek's concept of starting with why, but almost in like a reverse way. Why do you think so many businesses at scale or early on lose sight of that?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think there's probably a lot of ways to answer that question, so I'll just pick one. I think one reason is it's just a like, the nature of our time is that business is more scalable than it ever was. That you and I sitting here in our, home offices on with a webcam could potentially build $1 billion business. I mean, like it would take a lot of work, creating the right products for the right people. They're like, but it's not. There's no actual barrier to you doing that. That's the first time in history that's been true. Where the average person, I mean, I just heard that 29% of high school graduates now say their dream job is creator. You're like, what? That didn't exist until recently. And so coming out like that's because I think that's because a lot of people see the potential of like, wow, there's nothing keeping me from doing this. Well, what that means is that most people, when they start, they immediately start thinking about their business at scale. And then they think that is a good thing because they're like, this is going to be big, it's going to be awesome. But that means they do things that only work at scale, right? For example, if you're trying to build a business today and you look around and you see some other people in the same industry that are doing a business and they seem to be doing pretty well, and you're like, okay, it's a natural human thing for me to want to learn from what they're doing, right? Like I want to learn from someone else who's successful. Like if I want to be super buff, I'm going to look for someone who's super buff and see what they do. Um, the like that's a very natural human thing. But in today's world, if I were to look at somebody else who's running a business like mine, like or what I want to do, the only thing I can see is that they post on social media and people comment and like on it. I can't see, do they have a sales team? How much time are they spending in a given week over text messages or Zoom calls talking to potential clients? How long have they been doing this? I mean, I might be able to figure that out with a little research, but it's not obvious immediately. Do they have, what kind of search terms do they rank for and are they getting traffic from? How big is their email list? Like, I can't see the majority of things about their business, honestly. The only thing you can see is social media. And so you get this visibility bias where you're like, wow, that person has hundreds of thousands of followers and therefore they're successful. Correlation equals causality. I guess I must be building hundreds of thousands of followers to be successful. So that creates a social media visibility bias, but it also creates this fact where we're not thinking about, I mean, just as humans, we have a max capacity on faces that we can remember. The book is called Friends by, I forget his first name, but Dunbar. You've probably heard of Dunbar's number. Have you heard of this before? So a lot of people have heard of Dunbar's number. It's like, I think 150 of like how many relationships you can keep up with. Well, I want to say his name is Richard Dunbar. Of course, now I should just like look that up. But he actually also wrote a whole book on this, on like all the different levels of the research he did of like how many close friends can you have, how many just friends can you have, how many acquaintances. And there's a limit to how many faces you can remember, let alone names, right? Names, I think it's about 2,000 if I remember correctly that you can remember. Possible. Like you run into somebody from college and you're like, oh my gosh, Jeff. Faces is more than double that. So I think it's about 5,000. So as humans, like we have these limits, right? 10,000 followers on social media is not very many today. But it's more than we can process as human beings. And so because of that, I think that's a big reason why we lose touch with the humans on the other side of it. And then we use terms like followers and fans and subscribers instead of real human beings because we just can't comprehend it. So I could teach a whole lecture on that, like as you already asked, but that would be what I would introduce as kind of the first thought for consideration.
And naturally on this show, because the sort of umbrella is the concept of learning, understanding from experts who have accomplished things, because I can't do that at scale. Like if it's, building a serve to sell style of business, then I need to kind of chat with you. If it's someone like I interviewed Sister Helen Prejean, she had a Hollywood movie made after her life. Like I can't do all those things in a lifetime. So interviewing the experts, kind of distilling some of their learnings, breaking it down, sort of like guest speakers and careers is really, my big goal with this show. And so when you share that's kind of like the first thing of sort of curriculum or like something that you would teach to help people. I really appreciate that. And it's really helpful. Um, as it relates to uh, sort of the difficult things, like you mentioned Juicera and some people who get the phrasing wrong on the business that they build. One of the topics that I heard someone share recently was the idea of doing a storytelling workshop or like a storytelling event, I guess, where people come and tell stories. But instead of telling successful stories, it's called a failabration. And I thought that was really interesting. It's something I want to look into a little bit more by sharing some of our difficult times and the things we learned sort of the hard way. Maybe we can help some people who are looking to get into it themselves. Do you have some failabrations that you went through en route to getting to the point that you have all this understanding now?
Oh man, so many. I mean, that's a huge part of entrepreneurship is just getting comfortable with making mistakes. And I will say, in my family, my kids I have 4 boys, and my wife and I, we have kind of this reminder in our family. We remind our kids that we're tub thumpers. Are you familiar with the song "Tub Thumping" by Chumbawamba? Yes.
I remember it. My guess is a lot of people won't.
Yeah. Well, most people don't know it by the name. Most people be like, "No, I've never heard of Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba." Then you say, "I get knocked down, but I
Yeah.
get up again, and you're never gonna keep me down." So that is my approach to entrepreneurship and life, right? With my kids, like they fall down. It's like, well, remember we're tub thumpers. Like, okay, I get back up again. So yes, I have a lot. To pick, I don't know. I think I will say this, just because. So let's just use books as an example. Um, I heard this from someone recently that they were saying that like so many people stress about when they're creating a book, for example, because I just wrote my 3rd book. That a lot of people who want to be an author. I mean, some people have said that it's 80% of people want to become authors. Maybe that's before creator became cool, so maybe that number is a little outdated now. So, but regardless, it's like, why do most people, less than 1% of people actually do it, become authors, even though a lot of people want to do it? Some people would say as much as 80% of human beings. Why is that? Well, I think part of it is because we're all stressed about creating our magnus opus, right? Our greatest work. And so we're like, man, I mean, I got to create a book once I'm like old and wise and I know all the things. But so much of every part of business, but just to use books as an example, is about you got to back it up to creating your primus opus, your first work. It's like, that's all you got to do. So this is my 3rd book. I feel like now I know a lot more about books. In some ways, I feel like it's the first time that I'm like, I actually know, like, what is the purpose of this book for my business? What is the purpose of the book for the readers? What am I writing? How am I promoting it? And so, I also made mistakes with this book, as I always do. But my first book, for example, I really stressed about like raising the bar for the book of like it had to be the best book ever. I took the Magnus Opus approach to it. And so I wrote what I thought was my guide to building a business. And at that point, I'd started 3 different companies from scratch. 2 of them I was in the process of selling. And so like I knew stuff, but I also was like, well, yeah, but I don't know everything. And so I went out and interviewed dozens of the best and brightest minds in business today. And I took all their advice and I kind of compiled that to back up what I was saying and put it into the book, Survive and Thrive, How to Build a Profitable Business in Any Economy, including this one. Now, that was not a bad thing, but it really was coming from a lack of confidence of like, well, I was afraid somebody was going to be like, why the heck did you write a business book? And I also was like, why the heck am I writing a business book? But then I also worked with a hybrid publisher. So that was a mistake. So I worked with a hybrid publisher, which the promise of hybrid publishers is that they're like, okay, it's like the best of both worlds where it's not self-publishing, it's not traditional publishing. Like typically you're paying for part of the production and then they're a partner in the book and they help like promote it or distribute it, that kind of stuff. It's positioned usually as the best of both worlds. My experience was that it was the worst of both worlds. You lose a lot of creative control, you don't really get a lot in return, and it actually costs you money to publish a book. It cost me more money to publish my first book than my 3rd book. And my first book I had a publisher. But also, I kept looking to them for validation every time I had an idea for my book. And I was just like, okay, here's the title, here's the subtitle, here's the whole premise, here's my pricing strategy. I've never done this before. And they looked at it all and they were like, yeah, it's all great. And I was like, well, what am I doing wrong? They're like, no, you're good. And that probably should have been my red flag to be like, I'm out. But, I essentially have abandoned that book, which is kind of sad now because you're like, I put a lot of time and effort into it because the book at this point, like I get a PDF report 3 months after sales that kind of tells me like, however many people bought the book, but I have no other data, no other information, no feedback mechanism. There's 2 egregious typos in the book, but to get those fixed would require like, I would literally have to pay money and go through this like long editorial process to get a new version up there. So I made a lot of mistakes with that book. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, that's definitely one example. It's that book. I think, I mean, I've made money from that book and other things I've done because like people have read that book and they become clients and other things. But in terms of like book royalties versus like what it cost me to produce the book, I think 3 years later, I'm still in the hole at least $5,000 in terms of like book royalties versus like what I spent to get the book produced. And so that kind of sucks. Now I've made a lot more than $5,000 in consulting from that, but that's a book that like I created this thing. I stressed about it so much and then I kind of abandoned it. So I do have plans now to go back and republish that book as a self-published author, with a new focus. Cause again, like that book's a great example of where I wrote the book and I was like, okay, it's done. I handed it to my publisher and they came back and they said, it needs 10,000 more words. And I said, what's missing? And they said 10,000 words. And I was like, no, like I'm teaching something in the book. Like what is not clear? And they were like, just add some more stuff in there. Like add some more stories or like repeat yourself or something. Like we just need to make sure it's thick enough that if it's on a bookshelf in a bookstore, someone can read the spine really well.
Bunch of pictures.
Yeah.
So you're going to be like Taylor
Yeah.
Swift going back and re-recording your
Yes.
albums.
Yes. Survive and Thrive, John Misa's version is coming out soon. Yeah. It's probably going to have a new title. It'll probably be called Start From Scratch because Survive and Thrive is just not a great title for what it is, honestly. It was a great title for the time coming out of 2020, but we don't need that. We don't need to keep maintaining that level of panic that the title has. Survive!
Just survive and maybe you can thrive.
Maybe thrive too. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing the re-recording, the reproducing of the book.
Taylor version.
Yeah, exactly. And, when it comes to the idea of like sort of target audience or on the business side of things, because you mentioned that what the heck am I doing writing a business book? Well, for me as an onlooker, it would make complete sense why you would write a business book because you're really good at business. You have a lot to teach and you have a lot to help people with. Makes sense maybe why you aren't as confident about it. But when it comes to some of those failabrations, again, to use that term, like the idea of like what you talked about earlier with getting your target audience aligned with what you are building for them and stuff like that, is that something that you have always been really good at or learned from a mentor, or did you have struggles with that part too?
Oh, no, I definitely struggle with that. So my first course launch went really well, and that went to my head. And so this was back in I think it was 2015. Yeah, so just shy of 10 years ago. And I, launched an online course. And I had a really small audience. I had 257 email subscribers. But I launched the course and I made over $10,000 in 10 days. And I was like, done. I am King Midas. I can touch things and make money. Let's quit the job. Honey, you can retire. And then I created another course. But the first one, I did all the things that, like, in hindsight, were the reason why I succeeded. I did live conversations with the target client to learn about their problems and build that into the product. I did a beta period where I sold 5 seats at a discounted rate to get them to get early access to it and to give me feedback on it and refine it. Like I actually I got customer feedback the whole way through and I knew who I was talking to. The second time I was like, well, now I know how to sell courses. And so let me just create a course and I know what everybody needs to know. And so I'll create that and sell it. And it flopped. Just to get really painful here, that second course launch flopped while I was in a chair in a hospital beside my dad, watching him go through a week of testing to find out that he had stage 4 cancer. And so even while this course launch was starting to fade, I was sitting there next to him while he's sleeping in between tests going like, do I send another sales email? I was not feeling inspired. And then that was also when we found out my wife was dealing with postpartum depression that had been undiagnosed for a while. And we had 2 under 2 at the time, like 2 really little kids. And it was a really challenging time, for lots of reasons. And So that kind of forced me to get clear on like, where did I go wrong here? Like, what did I do? And to kind of go back to the drawing board of like talking to the humans. So yes, I'm preaching to the choir when I say don't forget about the humans that you're serving, because I've done that repeatedly. Um, I think, yeah, I think that's probably the most painful example of that, because I remember my dad coming out of a week in the hospital where he found out he had stage 4 cancer, looking at me and saying like, "Hey, um, is there any chance you could help pay our rent this month?" And I said no, because I couldn't, because I had quit my job, had a field course launch, spent a week with canceled some coaching calls and spent a week with him in the hospital, and my wife wasn't working at the time. Well, she was full time at home, but not getting paid for that. And that was probably one of the most painful moments of my life, for my dad to look at me as his oldest son and ask me if I could help him out, and I couldn't financially. I just didn't have the means. So there's a lot of failibration there, that comes out of that, and that was years ago now, and so like a lot of things have changed since then. But I mean, thankfully, my grandfather stepped in and he was able to help cover floats of bills until my dad could get back to work, because he was also self-employed, as a painting contractor. So yeah, it's a painful lesson that I try to remember.
Thank you for sharing that. That's the first thing I'll say. And as a tribute to your dad, I think that's pretty special. Something that certainly nobody would know just by tuning into this episode. The 2 times that you and I have met in the last while, my dad went in an ambulance to the emergency room the night before. And I was sitting at the hospital this morning at like 2 a.m. thinking about this episode that we were going to record later in the day, and having these little thoughts of like, oh, I'm going to be so tired.
Oh man,
And
yeah,
whether or not, what's important, I guess, in life when we think of the big picture, not just funnels and, copywriting and audience building or getting our avatar right, but like what matters overall. And these real moments that are shared with people, I think, are really powerful and helpful. So thank you for mentioning that. It
you're
really
welcome. And if
does
I
mean a lot.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. And if I could just add one more anecdote there, because I've been in this creator space for a decade now, which is like 100 years in creator years. Then I've seen a lot of people who have actually, had the Icarus problem of they've flown too close to the sun, where they've built businesses that were massively successful externally, right? You're like, wow, they have like massive course launches, they have massive audience on every social media platform, massive email list, best-selling books. And I, at this point, know multiple people who like personally know, not just people I know of, but personally know multiple people who did that and then said, nope. And then just like slowly, like they either burned it all down or they sold it or they walked away, or in one case, scrubbed himself off the internet so you can't find him anywhere. So he just exists in real life. And so it's like, that's the other thing, is that I think a lot of that comes back to losing the humanity. Is that if you have to get clear on who are the humans that you're building a relationship with or your business, because a creator business allows you to build relationships at scale, but it's still relationships. And you start to feel really lonely when you lose track of that, when you lose the connection to the people that you're serving. And so if you want to do this, I mean, honestly, at this point right now, for successful creators who earn at least 6 figures, it seems like there's like an average professional lifespan, almost like professional athletes. Like professional athletes, when they're at the peak of their career, there's like a short period of time where they make all their money. Right now, that's the norm for creators, is that they get big, they make a bunch of money. Unfortunately, they usually spend it all, and then they burn out and crash and burn and go change careers. And so it's like, that's not really great. That's not good for anybody. So I do think we have a shortage of people who stick around and teach for the long haul. And so that's my goal, is to be one of those people, where, I'm less interested in like the next year as I am the next decade, in terms of what I'm doing to serve people and to help them sell their smarts, to help them make the world a wiser place.
Took the words right out of my mouth, because I was about to say, and that is probably why you are able to serve, to sell, and kind of make an investment in people that, sure, as an ROI comes back to you as well. And just to hop into the time machine one more time and go back to that 10 years ago, when you did start those two different courses, and you mentioned the differences between the two and kind of the macro view in terms of like maybe the economics a little bit, or
Mhm.
just more so what the topics even were about them that were a bit different that got the audience wrong. Like, just because I know the types of questions people would be curious about listening to this episode. Well, what was the first course?
So the first course was called Unlock the Get Noticed Theme, which means nothing to anybody that's been on the internet since like I don't know, the last 5 or 6 years. Um, because in 2014 and 2015 and 2016, then most of the like kind of like biggest bloggers on the internet use WordPress to run their blog. And many of them, not all of them, but many of them use the exact same WordPress theme, which was called the Get Noticed theme. And it was created by a guy named Michael Hyatt, who I later ended up working with directly. But at the time, I was just a user of the Get Noticed theme on my blog. And so it's a really complicated premium WordPress theme that literally only 3,000 on the people on the planet had ever purchased. So super, super, super specific niche, right? If you're not one of those 3,000 people, you can't buy my course. There's no reason why you would. And the only reason why the course existed was because it was a really complicated theme. It was a poorly designed piece of software, honestly. But it could do some really cool things if you know how to do that. So people would look at my website and they're like, oh my gosh, how did you do those cool quote cards? Or like, how did you do like that like video montage? Or and so I answered a lot of questions in like the Get Noticed theme forum and kind of developed a reputation there of just being someone who was really helpful. So when I got tired of answering the same question over and over again, I recorded a video. But notice that it was the same question was already coming to me. I was not inventing the questions, which is what a lot of people do. Is they're like, here's all the things that I think people want to know. It's like, no, I was literally just answering the questions people were asking me every day in a course. And then I also like, I didn't know a lot about pricing research, but one thing I did was really smart was I looked at the price tiers for the Get Noticed theme. And basically it was like, there was like 3 levels. Like you could pay 247, no, it was 147, 247, or 497 for these 3 different options of like what you got with the theme. And I looked at that and I said, okay, well, if somebody already has the theme, that meant one of those price points they're comfortable with. So I made the price points for my course 147, 247, or 997. And so that was really smart, in hindsight, really smart pricing research of like, look at what are they already paying. But I just was copying and pasting. Yeah, so that course, there's a lot of reasons why I did well. Super niche, solved a very specific problem, was very useful to a very specific subset of people. And if you were one of the people who use the Get Noticed theme, you probably had a few friends who did too. And so when you heard about my course, you probably told them, check this out, this is really useful. But what I got away from that was like, wow, people love buying courses from me on how to use software. So let me create a course that's called ConvertKit Mastery, which is a course on everything you could ever possibly need to know on how to use, at the time, the brand new software, ConvertKit, to grow your email list and build a business off of it. So massive, just like all the things. And it sold okay. I sold a few. But again, like I didn't have a great pricing strategy. I didn't have the same authority in that with that audience. There's definitely some overlap, but I didn't have the same authority with that audience as I did with the Get Noticed theme audience. So it was really interesting though, is like at the time I was writing these behind the scenes articles on my blog of like, you know, my first launch at $10,514.85 story of like exactly screenshots of like emails and sales pages and all that kind of stuff. Like, here's what I did. And pretty quickly that stuff took off. Like people were way more interested in like the behind the scenes on like how I was doing internet marketing than my actual products. So one thing that I did was really smart was I just listened to the real people. It was like, they want more of this. And so that's when I started leaning more into teaching digital marketing. And again, from that angle of like, okay, well, here's what I'm trying. Here's an experiment. Here's here's what I'm learning from that. And that really is why I'm running a business today that teaches you how to build an online education business instead of a software tutorial company, which would be so boring. So I'm glad I don't do that.
Speaking of which, when it comes to that buzzword of niche or niche, which is always a fun inside joke that comes up on podcast episodes, how to pronounce said word.
Well, you can't quote Pat Flynn and say the riches are in the niches if you say niche. So
that's for sure.
So I've got a t-shirt that says that the riches are in the niches, but the reaches are in the niches. Just doesn't.
Yeah. It's actually not that bad, I suppose, if you're a real social media reach kind of person. But
yeah. Oh, okay. All right.
Which you aren't.
The reach is in the niche. Okay, niche. The reach. Okay, sorry.
The reach. Yeah, the reach is in the.
Okay,
yeah,
new quote. New quote.
New t-shirts. Let's roll them out. And that's exactly where I was going, was speaking of reach and social media. Like, somebody who just listened to this episode, who doesn't know your work in depth as, let's say, I do or many others do, might think that you're like a social media guru as well. But speaking of reach, you're on socials a lot, but not necessarily owned socials, right? You're in other people's audiences, which I think is super smart. But in terms of your own social media, what is the evolution of you thinking about getting into socials, maybe trying it, and then getting to the point where you almost have nothing? If you could just kind of tell the story of how we get to here specific to that.
No, well, just to set the record straight, I do now have nothing. I'm untaggable. I'm on zero social media platform. If you see someone else out there that says it's John Meese, it's not. So I don't know who it is. So I'm untaggable. But of course, like, I'm not a purist there, that I didn't start there necessarily. So I already mentioned earlier social media visibility bias, right? And that's a big part of this, is that for me, I wondered, okay, how much of social media is actually driving results in my business versus it looks like it is? Now, I will say, since I got off social media, I probably have missed out on some sales. I don't know what the percentage is. I mean, maybe it's like maybe I took originally a 10% revenue cut to free myself from the burden of creating content on social media. And so that's a pretty good trade. And I've since, rebounded since that and grown more because my energy is so focused on what I do. But one of my core values is do less better, which comes from Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism. And what I found was that, like, just, it's really hard to be an essentialist as a creator, because every platform wants you to create content on their platform in their own native medium. And, you got to have a following on every single platform for anyone to take you seriously. And so I got rid of my Facebook account a long time ago. It was probably 2017 or 2018, I think. I kept Twitter for a little while, then I got rid of that, and then I was off all social medias. And then my publisher told me I had to be on some social media for my first book. And so I created a LinkedIn account begrudgingly, and I started posting stuff. And I built it. And LinkedIn, I will say, like, that one was kind of fun. Like, it was like, okay, I'm starting from scratch, but like, I have an email list, so I could email them, be like, hey, I'm on LinkedIn now, and some people connected to me, and so pretty quickly I had 1,000 followers, and then I was creating content. I liked the comments, I liked the likes. I'm not immune to the dopamine hits of social proof, right? But again, when I sat down every day and just overwhelmed and all the things that I wasn't doing, social media was usually the one that was like the most public. And so it was the one that I felt pressured to do more of. Like, I have to post on social media every day, I have to respond to comments, that kind of stuff. But that meant that there was this whole period of time where I was doing that, where I wasn't creating or promoting more books. My newsletter was kind of like, semi-sporadic at that time. It wasn't like dead, but it was not really super alive either. And so I said, what, I basically just like came out of a retreat. I did these quarterly offsites, and which again, I got from Greg McKeown. On a quarterly offsite, I was just kind of like getting deep in, like, who do I want to be? Like, what do I want to do here? And I kept going back to author. And someone had said something to me, and I ended up writing about this. I don't remember where originally inspired the idea, but that's not really that important. If you wanted to go out today and you said, like, hey, this year I'm going to learn Romance languages. And so I'm going to study French, Spanish, and Portuguese at the same time, because I'm learning Romance languages. You would be like, okay, well, either you have a massive amount of time on your hands I don't know about, or you're probably going to be pretty bad at all of those, right? Like, they're dramatically different, although they are all Romance languages. But that's what most people do when they try to become content creators. And so, like, I'm going to have a video channel, I'm going to have a podcast, I'm going to write a newsletter, I'm going to master all of these mediums at the same time. And I was really convicted about that idea and said, like, man, I really want to pick my fluency, that, like, if I want to be, in the top 1% of the best in the world at anything, it's writing. And so because of that, I killed my YouTube channel, I killed my podcast, and I kept LinkedIn for a little while because I was like, I can write there, But then ultimately I killed that too. And I just said, like, no, I'm going to hyper focus on my newsletter. And my newsletter is actually, it's my book writing strategy. Because now what I do is I outline a book, and then I kind of reverse engineer from the book, like, what is my newsletter content strategy? And then I write the newsletter. And that's why I can afford to hire an illustrator to do custom illustrations professional illustrations for my newsletters, because it's not just an email that's going out and then it's gone forever. It's like, I'm creating an asset that's going to be part of my next book. It's going to be part of other things that I teach. And so that's been really good for me to lean into that. I'm just like, I want to do this really well.
You mentioned earlier that 29% of kids say they want to become creators, and then where that mashes up with like creator versus entrepreneur. And I feel like over the last, half hour plus, we've done a really good job of helping people understand like you can't just be a creator. You also kind of need to be an entrepreneur if you're going to succeed. And now we're kind of starting to get into some of like the habits and systems that you need to do that successfully. Uh, Knowing that you have 4 children yourself, as they grow into wanting to succeed in the world, maybe they'll fill those same statistics. At least one, I'm not great at math, but one or two of them at least are going to want to
Yes.
be creators.
Yes.
And is this advice that you would give them in terms of kind of like how bullish are you on the idea of sort of staying off social media versus it like just something that works for you?
That's a great question. My general advice, and I'll think about how to apply that to my kids. My general advice would be that if you're going to do anything, just have an intention or a reason for it. And so don't do social media just because everybody tells you you need to do social media. That's a horrible reason. Um, but if you have a clear strategy of like, I'm going to build my LinkedIn following because I know that that's where my target client hangs out because they're business owners and I want to bring them into my free workshop that I'm hosting every month because that's going to lead to my paid membership or something. Like if you have a strategy attached to it, then great. But most people don't. They just do it because everybody does it. And so I think for me, it's become a really fun conversation starter that people are like, I tried to tag you in that photo we took together and I can't do it. I'm like, I'm untaggable. And they're like, oh, and then that's like a great conversation starter in terms of this whole conversation of like, wait a minute, but aren't you like a digital marketing guy and you don't have social media? I also went over a year without internet at home as a digital marketer. So that's a whole other story, but, saved my sanity. But I will say that what I would tell my kids is it probably the same thing. Of like, I just want to understand why you're doing it. Like if they're teenagers and they get to a point at some point where they're like, I really want to connect to my friends, and I want to be on social media with them. I don't think I'm going to ban them from social media, but I might say like, okay, well, let's just get clear on what do you really want? It's like, well, I really want to connect with my friends. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about what are some IRL things, what are some in real life things we can do to also connect to your friends. Like, I'm not saying don't get on social media, but social media creates this sort of like fake connection to your friends that like sometimes causes a lot of young people. I know young men and women, I'm related to some young men and women who are just really lonely. Like they're on social media, they're liking, they're commenting, they're DMing, they're posting pictures of their life, but they're not really doing stuff together and they're really lonely. And so if you're using social media for connection, I would say like, okay, well, let's just pause and say, if you're going to do that, let's also like, I don't know, have your friends over for dinner once a week, or why don't you guys go for a hike on Friday? Like whatever it might be, like let's just find something to do together in real life with humans if you're doing it for social connection. And if you're doing it for business, then again, I would just get clear on like, okay, what's your metric of success? How are you going to measure that what you're doing on social media is driving business results? And don't say followers because that doesn't count.
I've never personally had like the goal of followers or audience, but because I didn't have you as a mentor 10 years ago, I've continued to accrue, let's say, an audience or whatever it is. Certainly not a community because there's not the connection, there's not the engagement, there's not like a very central theme to operate around. Um, to people from the outside looking in, especially people who aren't in the world of creatorship or entrepreneurship at all, they think it's like almost well, put it this way. I got offered like a free um, entry to a golf tournament because they were like, you have a lot of social media followers. I was like, I don't post anything about golf, but sure, I'll come play golf for free. So there's little moments like that where
Yeah.
people think it's good for some reason, some sort of like signal, that like a social signal or something. I'm not really proud of it at all. It just has happened because I was posting on social media over the years and kind of thought that's what I was supposed to do. Every time I talk to you, it's refreshing because I feel like I'm reminded, it almost feels like you're talking to me, right? Like really tough love in terms of like trying to do everything because I have a lot of ideas in my head about like, oh, I could post these YouTube videos, or maybe I should start an entire other YouTube channel, and like so many ideas that I think I'm pretty good at like chucking most of them in the garbage or putting them on a list for later. But that sort of like multi-passionate ADHD ideation mind, I think, can be a positive in the world of like business and creating and stuff like that too. So how do you create a balance? Because I'm sure you are an idea person as well.
Definitely. Well, I mean, some of that's a matter of like just regularly revisiting what I'm doing and just again asking like the whys, because sometimes I will start doing a project and then realize like, oh, okay, no, this is a mistake. Like I need to back up. Like this is not where I need to spend my time and attention. Um, so I mean, I think it's really just like having the discipline. Here, one of the things I do is this is one thing I do regularly, and is I create a vision document whenever I start a new project of like, why am I doing this? And I write in the future like what this looks like when it's successful, of like, because I've built whatever I'm doing, like because I've launched this book, then like, thousands of people get this kind of result in their life. I kind of just like write about that. That's one thing I do before I start any new project, especially if it's going to be like a product line or something like that. And sometimes in the process of writing that vision, I'm like, oh, that's actually really not that complicated or exciting. Or there's a similar way to accomplish that vision with like a much simpler product. Um, or sometimes it's like, well, if that's what I really want, why am I doing this other stuff? And so just sometimes just future pacing that is really helpful. In general, with my business, I try to take an ABZ approach where I want to get super clear on 3 points. Where am I right now, which is A? Where am I going, which is Z? And what's the next step, which is B? ABZ. I don't try to have the whole 26-step plan on how it's all going to work out. I think that that's just honestly in pretty much any industry. I just think that's foolish, because you don't know what's going to happen. All you can focus on is what's the next right thing. So that's the approach I take, is that ABZ approach. But the vision is part of that Z step for me, of mapping out what the end state is. What is my end goal with whatever I'm doing? So if I was to get on LinkedIn, for example, I would have to create a vision for that, of like, what does success look like? And then kind of reverse engineer. If I was to start a podcast, for example, same kind of thing. I've had 2 podcasts before, so I have definitely started something and then gone, okay, wait a minute. So I'd shut those down, right? I've done that twice now with podcasts. So if I were to do it again, it would have to have a really clear, compelling vision. And I can tell you right now, it would be very different. Like one of the things I would do, for example, is I would do only in-person podcast interviews. And so I'd probably find a studio in Nashville where I could do in-person podcast interviews, because I live in Tennessee, and just batch them out. I was just in Boise, Idaho for Craft and Commerce, and Nathan Barry showed us now ConvertKit, soon to be Kit. They showed us around their dream studio, where now they created this in-person video podcasting studio. It's brilliant, it's beautiful, and it's free for all ConvertKit customers. So I'm currently putting in a good word to see if they'll build another one of those in Nashville, because Boise is not very close to me or anywhere. It's the most geographically remote state capital in the U.S. But still, it's really, it's a totally different energy of like if you and I were sitting down in person having this conversation. It's just, it's something I think that more people are craving, and you could see that because of the results. Ryan Holiday has a business where about stoicism. The Daily Stoic is probably what he's most well known for. And he has a podcast, and his team, they sometimes did in-person video interviews or audio interviews, and sometimes did like Riverside or Zoom or Squadcast or whatever, like we're doing right now. And what they found is that the ones that were filmed in person and recorded in person performed 50% better every single time. And so now they just do in person. Now it's way more complicated, right? But when you're talking about mastery, that's what it requires. It's not doing a lot of things poorly, but saying like, if I wanted to pursue mastery in interviews on a podcast, that's what I would do, because that's mastery, right? That's not saying like, I'm going to do all the things okay. I'm like, I want to do one thing really well. But because my chosen fluency is writing and my chosen fluency is authoring, really, I'm probably not going to do that, because there's no part of me that's going to focus on mastery of that. Now, I could, at some point, have somebody on my team who's in charge of that, and they're pursuing mastery of podcast production, in which case, yes, I will show up and be the guest. But my area that I've chosen to pursue mastery in is writing, and specifically authoring.
Well, to provide one other thought there, mostly for the listener, because I want you to be completely focused and dialed in and doing your thing. And this is not a counter argument. However, I do think one of the things a lot of people don't think about with podcasting is, and as someone who's always being teaching, creating beginning to end, like a Netflix documentary that comes out and it's like 8 parts. Your 8 parts on how to serve to sell, or your 8 parts on how to be a better writer. You create it once, you leave it there forever. Is kind of something that a lot of people don't think about in the podcasting space, which I think is a really interesting kind of way to create within the medium. But anyhow, just so people are thinking about that a bit, you mentioned mastery and the fact that you wanted to be an author. I don't know what age that started, if there's some backstory, but earlier when you were speaking, it made me think of Robert Greene and how he's shared that, like, he was like, I don't know why, I don't even know what the exact style was going to be, but I just always knew I wanted to be an author. And another one of these topics is this idea of like career decisions. I don't know if you're familiar with the game Plinko, but on The Price is Right, where they used to drop the ball in and then it kind of
Yeah.
bounces around, ting, 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 and eventually it's going to come out in a specific spot. That's such a central theme of everybody's lives who I've interviewed on this show, from Brendan Kane, right to Black Adi Danza, and yourself. There's like these different moments where we make different decisions and we figure out where we're going, at least for now. But your backstory about why you wanted to be an author, like you're pretty adamant that that's what you wanted to be. Do you know where that came from?
Well, I don't know where it originally came from. Well, no, maybe I do. Let me just say this. My conviction around that has definitely fluctuated over time. And so, like, I don't want to pretend like when I was 5 years old, I was like, Dad, I'm going to be an author, and then therefore I am. Like, I just don't want to pretend like that happened. I did love reading as a kid. I was homeschooled, and I was one of those homeschoolers who wakes up at 6 a.m. to finish all his homework before his brother wakes up at 10. So I had the entire day to myself, but only 30 minutes of screen time allowed on any day, weekday, except for Wednesday and Friday. So lots of available time and lots of limits around screen time. So I read voraciously. I mean, I read hundreds or thousands of books as a young kid. All the way up until when I started working full time, and then I discovered another obsession of workaholicism as a teenager. But I always loved writing, but I only read fiction, and I really struggled to write fiction. I tried a couple times. I recently found one of my old stories. It's like one page, but I gave it. My 8-year-old is like really into like world building, and like he's always telling us a new story about this imaginary world he created when he was like 3, that he's still been like building the lore and history of it. He's 8 now. That's cool. So I recently gave it to him. So like we found an old story that I wrote when I was little. So I at least tried my hand at it. But I was told by my parents that I was the smart one and my brother was the creative one, and I believed them. And so I did not pursue writing for a long time because I'm the smart one and my brother's the creative one. And so I should go to college and be the first person in my family to get a college degree and go get a PhD and become a college professor. And like that was the track I was on. And then in college, I got really frustrated with economics, honestly. I worked for Economics Research Lab. I got to do some really cool stuff. I ended up being the one of the founding members of the Tennessee Bitcoin Alliance back when nobody cared about cryptocurrency. And I testified before as like a young, I think I maybe had just graduated college like a month before. I went to testify before the Tennessee State Congress to explain Bitcoin to a bunch of basically like old white men, and so they would pass a bill to make it easier to use cryptocurrency in Tennessee. This is on YouTube, by the way. You can go look it up. So like I was like really like into economics, and that was just a practical version of that. But I got really frustrated with that path, and so I don't know. I think at some point along the way, I'd always assumed I'd be an author. But one thing I was finding was that the more time I spent in academia, the less relevant and helpful and useful my writing became. Because I learned how to write academic papers that no one would ever read, right? Like it just sounds smart. My thesis was, if I remember correctly, the title of my thesis was the problem with hedonic quality adjustment in qualitative analysis.
Let's not spend an hour breaking that down.
Yeah, let's not break that down. I haven't talked about that in over a decade. I don't really want to. I mean, I think I could still defend that thesis, but I don't necessarily want to. Yeah. So along the way, I mean, I kind of just started blogging, honestly, just to like kind of publicly journal about like what I was learning, and that's what I would recommend to most young people is like don't pretend like you have it all figured out. Because that's actually the most annoying creators are like 17-year-olds saying like, here's the key to relationship happiness in my 15-second TikTok dance. And you're like, you don't know anything. Sorry. And I say that as someone who's like, I'm only 33. Like, there's a lot I don't know. But I think there's so much value in saying like, here's what I'm learning now, especially if you're young, is like just documenting what you're learning is really helpful to people. And it's also really honest. Like just saying like, hey, I mean, for example, if you want to talk about relationships and you are a 17-year-old TikTok influencer saying like, hey, you know, my boyfriend and I got into a fight last week and we almost broke up, but here's how we figured out how to work through it. And just like that's, instead of sharing like the 3-step way to make sure you never get into a fight, like just share like your story. Because here's the thing, AI can give us 100 how-to steps on how to solve every problem, but AI doesn't have personal stories. And so that's really where the creator demand is going, is like, tell us what's about your real life and what you're really learning as you're learning it. And so for me, that's kind of how it started, as writing on a blog. And then as people liked my writing, I realized that, wait a minute, maybe I could actually do more of this. And then that's kind of how I started down the path towards becoming an author. But I will say the best benefit, there's been a lot of benefits to becoming an author, but the best benefit that I did not see coming was people in my family and in my hometown finally understand what I do for a living. Now, remember, the books don't really make a lot of money. But as soon as I was an author, they were like, oh, yeah, he's an author. Got it. Before that, they were like, he does a blog thing. Like, he writes money and, I mean, he writes words and then money comes out. Like, I think maybe he does stock trading. I don't really know. Like, they just like internet marketing stuff. But as soon as I was an author, everybody, like, who's not a creator that I know, like people in like my real life, you know, family, friends, they were like, okay, he's an author. Got it. I know exactly what you do. So that was an unexpected benefit.
Which would be the complete wrong reason to legitimize your life to become
Yes.
an author. However, I do completely understand that. Like, it's so hard to explain anything in internet business world to people who kind of sort of don't get it, to use a phrase.
Yeah, I used to say, when they're like, what do you do? I used to say, well, I'm a blogger who blogs about blogging for people who want to blog. And so that was kind of like, that would shut the conversation down real fast, but it would give me a chuckle. And so that was my go-to. Before I was an author, that was my go-to.
Right. I had a very similar like upbringing in that I was in all these creative writing courses, and my teachers were always like, "Oh, you're so good at writing." Because I wasn't homeschooled, did go to traditional schooling. Not that we'll have time to really get into the topic about that, but it is a cool one, you know, education these days versus, you know, what your experience was. But I would get sent to like this community-wide, city-wide like workshop for young authors and all of these kinds of things. All the while, I don't know that I could pinpoint if it was my parents or maybe some other teachers or whatever, but all the while it was kind of like similar to the goal of being a professional athlete, but even almost seemed more scarce, where people are like, yeah, no, that's not like an actual real thing. Like you can't go. I'm trying to think of who the author who wrote Goosebumps, R.L. Stein, like at that time, like you can't go be R.L. Stein. That's like, he's not even a real person. Like that's not for you. You need to go to, and then I went to university, did the whole thesis thing, all like a very, very similar progression to come back to shit. I could have been an author.
Yes. Turns out you just need to write.
Yeah. And so this is what I'm really curious about, because a lot of people, specific to that medium would be being told or will have being telling themselves the same negative mindset beliefs around the possibility of being an author or writing. And I think this is such a unique opportunity to ask you, because you don't have social media, what does the day-to-day sort of flywheel look like? Or like how does it work when your goal is to become an author, not using social media? That's a pretty darn cool thing.
Yeah, so I mean, it looks a little bit different depending upon the season, but like one thing I do is I regularly appear as a guest on other people's podcasts, like this one.
Thank you.
It's a great way to, you know, just to have a conversation with somebody that I enjoy talking to, and that also I hope helps people who are listening to it. And often that leads people to come back into my world, to join my email list, to join. And that's just where it starts, is like, you know, join my free newsletter or my free crash course. And then that often leads to buying a book, you know, maybe joining my membership. I have a membership called Soul.Coach Club, like that whole thing. But also, like, again, where my focus here is do less, better. I just was just a few weeks ago, I was the opening keynote speaker at Craft and Commerce, which is ConvertKit's conference. And so there were over 300 people in attendance. Every single one of them has a 6 or 7 figure creator business, or some 8 figure creator business, massive audiences. Most of them are social media famous. That's fine. Because then I gave an opening keynote talk and I just like rocked the room, where I just focused on working with a speaking coach to make sure it was the best talk I'd ever given, and that it defined the whole event. And so I also taught an optional workshop while I was there. So I was opening keynote speaker, and then I taught an optional workshop. Out of the 300 people, 50 of them came to my workshop. Roughly 50. I didn't actually do a head count. It might have been 60. But and then the final day of the conference, I also had a book launch party, and I intentionally planned it so Serve to Sell, my newest book, came out while we were at the conference, and I got one of the sponsors of the conference, Lulu, to cover the cost to print 300 copies of my book, hardcover and premium hardcover edition, and give it away to everybody in the audience. So I didn't just like show up and speak, because some of the speakers flew in, gave their talk, left. We didn't really talk about them. Like, their talk was fine. But what happened was, instead, was at the closing party of the event, so many people were like, oh my gosh, you know what? As I'm reflecting back on the whole thing, this was so good. John, you really set the tone for the whole event. It was incredible. I've got your book. Can I get you to sign it? Like, all that kind of stuff. I remember, I'm getting paid to speak there, right? Like, I didn't pay for this opportunity. I got paid to do it. But I had someone tell me before they left, they said, man, I really did enjoy the John Neese conference sponsored by ConvertKit. You're like, because that's, and of course they were joking. It was ConvertKit's conference, but it felt like that, where there were 8 sponsors at the event who had booths, but 4 of them were featuring me at their booth as an example of like, here's what John's quiz looks like, because I use their quiz platform. Here's what John's book looks like if you want to publish a book with us. Like, here's what, like, just, and so I just basically said, like, I'm going to do one speaking event this year, and I'm going to treat it like it was 50. And that's still, turning into a lot of results and incredible relationships for my business. So that's the kind of thing that one of the people at the event, who's the most social media famous person who came to the event, probably paid a lot of money to come speak. She flew in, she came to the speaker dinner, had no idea who any of us were, kind of like chatted casually with us, gave a talk the next day, didn't go to anybody's talk before or after hers, and flew out and left. And everybody forgot about her. And the most common thing people said is like, man, her talk it was like she was trying to say way too much. Like, I couldn't keep up. And she's the most social media famous person in the room. She didn't have the time or energy or capacity to master that opportunity. But I did. Because I took that energy that she's spending on social media and I spent it elsewhere. So that's just one example of how I do that. And I write. So I write a free weekly newsletter. And it's actually set up, this is like way in the weeds, but it gets actually set up as an automation, whereas most people send a newsletter where like every week I send an email and then it just dies. So I get just like into the ethereal internet. Whereas if you sign up for my newsletter, you get issue number 1, and then you get issue number 2, and then 3. And right now it's a 6-month long automation where you get my newsletter first every day for a week, and then twice a week for 6 months before you get to whatever I'm writing today. Now you don't know that unless I told you. Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels just more like a crafted experience for you. But I'm building an asset. Well, many of those newsletters end up being part of a book. And then books are a great way to also grow in terms of like, I'm in the process right now of building, this doesn't exist yet though, but I'm in the process right now of building a book marketing flywheel around my books, where 100% of book royalties goes back into Amazon ads to sell more books. Because the goal of the books is not to create cash, it's to create customers. And so I don't need to take my royalties out of that. I make most of my money from my membership in my coaching program. And I'd rather the books just continue to build momentum. And so that's what I'm focused on right now.
What are some of the future things, whether it's a book or a course or something, an offer? Maybe you're going to use it or maybe not, but it's on that list of things that you have to put to the side for now. When you get to kind of think, dream big for your future, what's something that comes to mind?
Well, I think it's really important that you right-size your business to your stage of life. And so as I started to get some success in the last couple of years with my own sold out coaching program, and the success my clients were getting with that, I started doing what you're supposed to do, which is, hire some coaches, train them to take over sales, start getting a program where other people can coach and you can certify in your program, work with a financial coach to map out the compensation model for scaling my team. And I started to do that. And then thankfully at some point I realized like it was getting less fun. It was getting harder. And yes, I could see the path that if I continued on that, I was going to scale my revenue more. But then I looked around at my priority right now and I'm like, you know what? I think there's actually an enough number that I just need to generate in this season of life where I've got 4 little kids at home. I just need to generate enough revenue to fund my lifestyle and then spend the rest of my time with my kids. I don't really want to scale to a huge team or a multi 7 figure business or anything like that. And so that's been one of the things that was actually, I say that with conviction, but also it was challenging in that moment to be like, I've helped clients build 7 figure businesses from scratch. And I essentially committed to not building a 7 figure business and just keep, maintaining my business as sold out as a multiple 6 figure business to say like, you know what? No, I'm going to stay here because this is what allows me to be present for my family and my kids. And there are some people who look down on that and we're like, oh yeah, your business doesn't make $1 million a year in revenue yet. I guess you're not like a real entrepreneur. And at one point I was running 3 different companies at one time and I sold 2 of them because similarly, I was like, this is exhausting, and someone had told me that like, well, someone did tell me at one point that to be a real entrepreneur, not like someone who's someone really said this pejoratively at one point. They were like, oh, you just have like a lifestyle business. You're not a real entrepreneur. But like, what the heck are we doing this for if not lifestyle? What else is there? So it took me a while to get conviction that like I just need to build a business that's the right size for me. And that meant saying no to that meant letting go of most of my team and just saying like, nope, I've got a small VA team and like 1 coach and 1 book production assistant, and that's really it. And like that's all I want. That's all I need. It's simple, and I can sustain it, and then I can go make my millions in my 40s when my kids are working on grandkids, and like that's fine. So I can take the grandkids on trips. But I don't need that right now.
Well, it's really inspiring, and unfortunately, people will have, unless I clip this, had to have waited an hour to hear that one line because I think it shows a lot of wisdom, and bravery is maybe another word because, like you said, other people, if they comment and kind of talk down on it, then you have to be like, no, wait, this is what I want to do. And I've had a lot of those moments throughout my sort of creator career as well. A lot of them revolve around parenting, like I'm getting advice from someone. I'm like, wait a second, like you don't have kids? Like I just got puked on at 4 o'clock in the morning. So there is a difference there. And,
Yeah.
we could spend a whole other hour talking about
Yes.
that. I'm a big fan on this show too, of trying to give people their flowers, so to speak, like to other mentors. And you mentioned Michael Hyatt earlier. I know naturally we're going to have to wrap pretty soon. So I'd love to ask, like, I'm learning a lot of things from you. People who listen to this are going to learn a lot of things from us. Are there other people that you have learned from over the years that really you want to give tribute to?
Yeah. Thank you for giving me that chance. I would love to. I mean, there's a lot of people, right? I have to first give tribute to my wife because she's sort of the unsung hero in most of this. That she's been, from the beginning, kind of bought into this idea and believing in me and what I'm doing in terms of building our business. And I do think of it as our business, even though I'm the face of it. And most of her job is taking care of our household. Right now, she's at a doctor's appointment with one of our kids, and taking care of our kids. But she's also my closest advisor. That, like, whenever I'm running through a business decision, it's her and I are talking it through. And I could not pay a consultant for the level of insight into me and my business that she gives me. So I got to give her flowers because, again, it's kind of a thankless job to be the spouse behind the project where I'm the face of it. And then I think beyond that, I mean, I think, as I became an entrepreneur and got into online entrepreneurship, the people who really inspired me the most, that like, I like to think that I was sort of like this kind of like fusion of Pat Flynn, Ray Edwards, and Michael Hyatt 10 years ago. That like, that's who I was, those are the 3 people that I learned the most from. And over time, I mean, at first I actually kind of wrote like them. I kind of like tried their voices on for size. And then ultimately I found my own style through practice and iteration. But they definitely influenced a lot of what I did. And then most recently, I would say Rob Fitzpatrick. He wrote a book called Write Useful Books that changed my entire approach to writing. And so my first 2 books, they're pretty good. But the 3rd book is written with with Rob's approach, Rob's style, completely changed what book I was writing. And that's proven to be a really good thing. So Serve to Sell is my shortest book yet, my most useful book yet, and so far my most popular book yet. So I think there's a lot of, I got to thank Rob for that.
it's awesome to think of all of those people and be like, wow, I could ask you 20 minutes of questions on each of those people now. We
Yeah.
can create content forever into infinity and beyond, or just talking about being, husband, wife, and trying to, as you said, have one person be the face of it, one person be a little more sort of behind the scenes, so to speak, raising kids, homeschooling. I always do pretty thorough research and never get to any of it. Like I wrote down the concepts from Always Be Teaching. Kind of some of the things that you learned from Prosperous Coaching and the serving calls that you do and that I've experienced that are just like incredibly well done, as well as deep work and getting into a little more about essentialism, storytelling, and then specifically how you craft an amazing email. Like I always jot down these things knowing we're not going to get to all of them.
Yeah.
But I wrote down being an empath and how you actually deal with that, because that's something that a lot of people don't talk about publicly. So many things, all the things. But, we're going to wrap. I want to get to the theme questions. The other thing aside from giving flowers, though, is because there's so much, I don't want us to log off and be like, oh, darn, I was going to say that, or I would have liked to share this. So is there anything like in terms of those topics that you think you're like, oh, I should have mentioned that as well?
Well, it's all stuff that you can. I mean, at this point, I've been doing this for a decade and writing about it most of that time. So thankfully, yes, I have a lot of things to say, but you can get all of that in my books or my newsletter. So I think the main thing I would encourage people to do is that if you found any of this conversation helpful or interesting and you want to go to further, then go to servetosellbook.com/JKL. If you go to servetosellbook.com, it's going to take you to Amazon. You can buy my latest book. You're welcome to. But for Justin, I agree to give away a free version of the ebook. And if you do that, not only will you get a free version of the ebook, which is normally $10 on Amazon, but you'll also get my Sell Your Smarts crash course, which is free, and then my Sell Your Smarts newsletter. And so that's where really I continue to explore these ideas. And I love when people reply and we kind of have these, essentially conversations to go deeper on these topics there as well. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and I hope everybody who listens to this does. And like I said earlier, I'll share some content that helps move that message forward as well, because I don't even know, and I know I've mentioned this to you before, I don't know how I found your emails, but that's like the magic of what you talked about earlier. There's some allure to it all and eventually will be lore around like the story of like how you've succeeded so well and why you were at, like ConvertKit's conference speaking. Like all of that I think is really inspiring, and I'll definitely do my part to make sure that people also have the opportunity of finding your work. So
Thank you.
With of course, with the rapid fire questions, there's always 3. And the first one is one thing that you're learning that maybe even is off topic from all these things.
How to be a better parent. I mean, as my kids grow, it changes with every season.
I can't think of anything more important, that's for sure. And speaking of kids, one piece of advice that you would pass on to the next generation, if you could just leave that one piece of advice.
Focus on relationships before results. What happens is when you focus on relationships before results, surprisingly, results come after. And that was actually the topic of my talk at Craft and Commerce. It's an important lesson that I've had to learn repeatedly.
Hard sometimes to not get distracted by awesome points during these rapid fire questions.
Yeah, rapid fire, Justin, rapid fire.
Yeah, exactly. Keep it moving. If you were to ask one question for me, you go back to being a podcaster. We're in person, maybe even in Nashville, and you just have something that's come to mind over the last hour or otherwise. But if you were to ask me a question, what would that be?
I think I would ask you why. Like, I would love to know your core motivation of why do you do this, right? You don't have to podcast, why do you do it?
Which is something that I ask myself almost every time, hours before an episode.
Well, I didn't mean it as like a philosophical question, just more curiosity, but yeah.
Yeah. But it's just important to say that it'd be easy for me to give up because I'm like, no, it'd be easier to do other things. And I think that being able to, as I said earlier, help people who have no idea how to get started and, really can't yet afford to go take an online course, even if it is like $19.99 or something, but have a lot of potential And I think that potential is so connected to their mental health and their vitality and their ability to succeed in life. But they need some help as to how to get started. And maybe one person wants to be an author. Like I said earlier, someone else might want to be a dancer. So I want to be like the career day person who's able to kind of share the entire view and landscape of those different options for people. And then if I kept going right now, I'd be at the risk of getting philosophical because there's a lot of reasons why that's personal for me, whether it's paying tributes to my brother or the struggles I had trying to figure out a career and a path and stuff like that. And, paying it forward to my kids, wanting to help them be better prepared for the modern options they have too.
Right.
And so
The new
that's why
world.
I keep doing it.
That's good. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Justin, just keep learning.
Yeah. Boom. Mic drop. I appreciate you. And
It's my
I know
pleasure.
you're someone who knows that time is money. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It really means a lot.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Well, keep up the good work, Justin. The same goes for all you listening. Keep up the good work.
Will do. Thank you.